Welcome to the 202nd installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. If you're an owner of agricultural land who doesn't farm, but wants to see it taken care of utilizing high standards of stewardship, finding a good renter can be difficult. For one thing, farming methods that build soil health can take 3 or more years to show results, and many leases are short-term arrangements. So, what incentive does a renter have for utilizing cover crops, diverse rotations, no-till, managed rotational grazing, and other methods that sustain and improve the land in the long term? It turns out there are ways to set up leases and lines of communication that not only meet the landowner's stewardship goals, but benefit the farmer who's renting the land. During a recent series of Land Stewardship Project workshops, farmers, landowners, and conservation experts talked about ways to develop landlord-renter relationships that result in practices that are good for the soil, as well as agronomically and economically viable. After one of the workshops, I chatted with landowner Juliet Tompkins, as well as Kristen Brennan, a soil health specialist with the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. First, Tompkins and I discussed how she and her husband, Prescott Berg, have set up lease agreements with 4 different beginning farmers on their property in western Wisconsin. Tompkins and Berg, who for many years operated a grass-based livestock operation on their land, got out of farming several years ago. But then, in an attempt to help out the next generation of farmers, around 3 years ago, they started leasing small parcels out. When they started renting the land out, Tompkins and Berg wanted to make sure that the soil stewardship they had practiced would continue. Juliet shared with me how they have used a combination of research, clear communication, and written leases to do just that. So Juliet, we just had a really great workshop here for mostly for non-farming landowners who are looking for information on how to work with renters and maybe set up an arrangement where that land is being farmed in a way that fits their kind of stewardship ethic and kind of way that they would like that land to be taken care of in the long term. You really gave a nice summary of the situation you're in. You had farmed, and then you and your husband Prescott had decided to get out of farming and had let the land sit for a while, but then you decided it needed to be farmed again. And so you describe a little bit about what you kind of approached or got the word out that you were looking for renters. Talk a little bit about that, but then you have, because you have a background as an attorney, you had set up a really nice kind of template for the way you do your leases. You didn't just say, okay, we're looking for renters, we got them. You kind of set up, this is what, you guys had built up this farm. You had built up the soil health. You wanted that to continue kind of thing.
We started out, if I go back to where your initial inquiry was about, using land stewardship projects, farmers seeking farmers, for connecting with individuals who wanted access to land. And the origins for our doing that through LSP in particular is because of LSP's work helping farmers get started, and the recognition through the Farm Beginnings program, and the recognition that one of the largest challenges to those beginning farmers is having access to land. So when we were looking out over our fields at our small farm in western Wisconsin, we realized, well, here we do have some land that could be farmed, should be farmed in some cases. It's good quality fertile land, and we wanted to make it accessible to those smaller operations that needed a place to start. So we used the Farmers Seeking Farmers networking system on the LSP website and connected with 3 vegetable farmers over the course of a couple months who were looking for 3 to 7 acres each. First started off having a conversation between myself and my husband saying, well, what is important to us to talk about with these people? From that conversation together, we developed just a set of interview questions. I mean, it sounds a little funny, but we did want to know something about the land ethic of these individuals, what their experience had been, what equipment they might need, what expectations they had in renting somebody else's land. And so we had a lot of ground to cover, and for us it was just easier to do that in kind of an interview format. So we did that. Then as the ones we interviewed about 5 different people and decided 3 of them it seemed like they were really going to work out, and we took the next step to talk those individuals through a lease agreement that we had developed, having talked with other farmers that had been in similar situations on prior properties. I put together combination of all those leases, and then added a fair amount of my own provisions. There's just like, well, what if this happens, or what if that happens? So they're lengthy, and they might seem like overkill, especially if you're coming from renegotiating a lease agreement with an existing person who you've already been in agreement with, because because they cover so many details, and it's understood that lots of those prior agreements have been just done on a handshake, and this might feel like, wow, this is just so much formality. But so granted, this is coming from someone who you have not had. It makes most sense for someone you've not had been in a rental agreement with, and it's a way of just putting down your expectations. And we figured that the first and foremost one in that particular agreement is that good communications are imperative, and that we rather have lots of questions and have understanding about how things will be operating on the farm, rather than someone going ahead and doing something and then ask the question afterwards. So that's what we tried to head off, and then we really tried to model that behavior in all of our early communications with the farmers, and it proved to work really well. Not flawlessly, but really well. So those were the couple of tools that we used to get ourselves started. That was 3 years ago. Those 3 farmers, all of them have stayed on for that and grown in the number of acres that they rented. Again, still staying with just vegetable production. They were small acreages, but two of those 4 farmers now have managed to cash flow well enough that they could go out and get loans and are buying their own farms. So they're graduating onto their own homes, their own farm places. And now we've got another farmer that's coming in to take one of their places. It's going to start very small because they're very early on in the process. And we've added a grazer who's also doing a beef operation on our farm. So learning all the time, but it's been so far a really positive experience all the way around.
I think that's a really good point that you make about the communication piece. But what were a couple really key questions that after you did the interviews, you went, oh, I'm really glad we asked those, that those were brought up kind of in a more formal setting?
I think it was what duration of the contract was really important. It was our sense that these are folks that needed to have enough time on our land in particular to get their operation up and going and cash flowing, if it was going to work at all. So, and these individuals were going to be breaking sod for doing this, because we had been a pasture-based business farm up until that point. So we had an understanding that we were open to having at least a 3-year, having them there on the farm for 3 years. But we wrote the contract as a 1-year lease. So we were always in a position to be able to revisit it, fine-tune it if we needed to. And that was very helpful to have just that structure in place. And as it turned out, they all have stayed the 3 years, and some are staying on for a 4th and 5th year. So coming to having an understanding, they knew that was one way that they knew that we as landowners were anxious to, we understood the position they were in, and we're anxious to have them succeed. We had a really nice compliment from one of the farmers that are leaving us now, that are moving on to their own farm, that they really felt very supported in being on our farm. And that was really our intention, was to have them feel supported, give them a place that they could do something that they may not have had an opportunity to do otherwise. And I think it's those small things, i.e. this lease, just the length of the lease, was an indication of, here we are, we're trying to present you with a situation that will, if it's possible, make it possible for you to succeed.
One of the things you'd mentioned was you really wanted to emphasize one soil health building technique, which was cover cropping, and that there was a situation where one of the renters, that they just didn't get it done, or so you kind of had to adjust the lease, or I'm not sure exactly what you did, but can you explain what you kind of did to make sure that going forward is something that's part of the situation?
Yeah, the cover crops is something that's difficult, especially in vegetable production. And I have to put myself in their shoes and say, yeah, they're going to be harvesting their crops their vegetables as late as they can into the season, which these winters have been, into November these days. Well, it's too late to put a cover crop in that particular field when you're just harvesting. But our challenge there was that it was, and again, I had to put myself in their shoes, their goal, when they had limited hours and every day, was to harvest out as much as they could. And they had no real incentive for putting anything back on the land, on those plots, those fields that they had actually harvested already, in a timely fashion. They were always out there to sell the next eggplant or tomato or whatever it was, and get it paid for by their customer. We initially had said, well, if you don't, since we were going to put the cover crops in anyway, if they would not, the provision in the lease said that if they didn't get it done, then we'd have to charge them the cost of what it would cost us to put it in. And we thought that might work. Well, that didn't work. Unfortunately, and we're not talking big bucks here, but it is kind of it's the health of the soil that we're mostly at the bottom line is mostly concerned about. So I think what we've decided to do this next coming year is just put an additional dollar per acre amount that would cover the cost of the cover crops on the lease amount, and have it explained, and to both in the language of the lease and also talking about it, saying we're putting this on in the event that you don't get the cover crops in, and we'll have the money. But in the event that you do, you've absorbed that cost, then we'll get that money back to you, because we don't want to be, rewarding ourselves for something that doubly rewarding ourselves. So we're going to try that and see if that might be a way of their appreciating that there is a cost there. It'll be a prompt for the conversation of the importance that those cover crops are on these fields, and then hopefully it will actually get the work done in a timely fashion.
Well, that really gets at the point of you tell them that, hey, we'd like to have this long-term relationship with you, but we want to have the flexibility of adjusting the lease each year. This is an example where that is a huge advantage.
Right, exactly, yeah.
When you were first setting up that lease, I think you had told me you kind of did some extensive research on sources of information for that, what kind of went into that lease. Where was it that you actually started from ground zero when you was like, okay, we're going to actually write up a lease?
Yeah, it was from one of the farmers that came to us had a lease from their from their previous rental.
Okay.
And they said, here, if you need help with the lease, here, take a look at this. So they got the agreement of the landowner in that case to share that lease. So they just shared that, and I took that and just added on to it.
Okay. And related to that, so what would be the first 2 or 3 steps you'd say if somebody's thinking in a situation like this? What's the first 2 or 3 steps they should take to kind of maybe it's the middle of winter, maybe it's probably a lot of people are leasing by winter, but let's say it's the end of the previous growing season. You're looking at the next growing season. And you want to set something like this up with a brand you've never done it before.
Have the conversation with other members of your family, if it's you and your partner or spouse or whomever, that you're in agreement that you're okay with renting out your land, because there things are going to be done differently on your land than you would have done them yourself. And if you are not comfortable with that, it's a non-starter. Mm-hmm. If you're comfortable with that with certain conditions, then those are the conditions that you want to have expressed in your conversations as well as put into the lease. And so you just have to be really clear about that you want. And in that, one, you want to do this, but then what does it look like? Are you wanting to rent all of your acreage out, or what kind of uses are you okay having it be put to? You need to find the common ground between the members of the family that will affect, whoever is living there, obviously, and how you'll handle that. And reviewing what your resources are, what you want to make available. Do you want them, rent them your tractor? Will you give them access to water? Are they going to have to bring in water? If you're doing grazing arrangements, who's providing the fencing? Can they use your fencing? Do they have to provide all their own fencing? Will they do their own fencing work? So everything that would be in that lease, you need to talk through yourselves and say, where do we stand on this? Then begin to look for the farmers themselves. Great resources within the Land Stewardship Project website, as well as the Farm Beginnings existing classes that are going on. Those are people coming out of that course that are going to be needing places to start farming. So that would be another resource. Looking at those individuals that are going to need access to land, and then start your conversations.
Next, NRCS Soil Health Specialist Kristen Brennan talked to me about how landowners and renters need to become a kind of team. They are to create a relationship based on good stewardship. Such teamwork means learning about and recognizing the potential for building healthy soil. It also means accepting the economic and logistical challenges farmers face when trying to put in place new, innovative practices.
The most important thing to realize off the bat is that you are a team. You guys need to work together, and it's really important that you actually sit down and have a conversation with your renter. Find out what are your long-term goals as that landowner, and how does this compare to theirs as a renter? Do you both value stewardship and sustainability? That's probably the most important question. Do you have the same values and ethics? And is that a shared goal that you guys have? And then what are the expectations, and what are the things that you are not willing to compromise on? I think most rental agreements are relatively short-term, so for a lot of renters, there's very little incentive in this idea of investing in long-term gains in soil health. A lot of times we talk about this 5-year hump, that it takes anywhere between 3 and 5 years when you're doing soil health before you can really see any sort of measurable benefits. We do have a lot of farmers that say, though, after just 1 year of changing their management practices, that they can see a difference. So most renters, when they're in these short-term sort of rental agreements, won't be around to see or reap those benefits. But if you're able to find a renter that you can work with who's open to making these changes, maybe you want to consider a longer rental agreement so that they can go on this journey with you and really take ownership in the changes that you'll see over time. It's important to find somebody who's maybe a little bit open-minded, open to making changes in their management system. I have a landowner that I work with who says it's kind of difficult sometimes to find renters who's even willing to make even the smallest of changes. Think about starting small and taking baby steps. Can you eliminate fall tillage? Are they willing to do that? Are they willing to make small changes in their equipment, maybe going to a straight point on their chisel versus a twisted point, which creates more disturbance? It's really easy to get really excited about soil health and want to jump in the deep end with both feet, do 100% no-till and multi-species cover crops, and that's great. Yes, that's ultimately what we're hoping to strive for, but that transition to that kind of system takes time and increased management. And so I think, yes, you want to promote soil health, but you also need to have this understanding that every change that farmer makes in their management is going to lead to a different change. So if they're going to implement cover crops or reduce their tillage, it's going to impact the timing and the type of that tillage and how the use of their cover crops are going to impact their herbicide program. How are these changes going to impact the timing, the application method, and the type of fertility that they use? So really, it's not simple. You're not going to snap your fingers and make soil health happen. Everything is a moving part and component, and it's going to take time. So really, you need to sit down with your renter, discuss what equipment and resources they have, and what they're able to do within the bounds of those of their limitations. It's really important, yes, if there are demands, things that you're not willing to compromise on, but also keep in mind you don't want to set that bar too high. Try to put yourself in your shoes and be really open to working within the limitations that they have. They may not have the ability to go no-till, but maybe they could change their equipment, like we talked about a little bit earlier, something that causes less disturbance, maybe minimize their tillage passes during the growing season. I think it's also useful to recommend trying something new on their most forgiving ground. We always say sometimes, give it a try on the worst ground. But really, I think it's the opposite. You want them to succeed. So maybe have them try something new on the good ground so that they have the most chances for success with soil health. Again, small steps, baby steps. Really, any movement in the right direction is progress. So we always say light a small fire and watch it burn. If you can't find common ground with your producer, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I don't think this is going to work. The landowner that I was speaking to, he's fired a couple different renters because they weren't even willing to try even the smallest of changes. But word gets out, he said, and then he soon had another person knocking at his door that was willing to work with him. So don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to sever that relationship. And more than likely, there will always be somebody else who's interested in working with you. I think education is really key. The landowner that I was speaking with, he reads a lot and he attends a lot of soil health workshops and field days across the state, and then he passes that knowledge on to his renters. And there's a lot going on all the time. I know Land Stewardship Project, Sustainable Farming Association, the universities, a lot of the county level SWCDs put on workshops, and there's just tons of resources available online, on YouTube, USDA, NRCS, their soil health website. webpage has just tons of information. They also have a YouTube channel that contains the science of soil health and the Hope in Healthy Soils YouTube videos that are really fantastic. Not only that, but don't forget that each county has a local NRCS field office. The way that my landowner got to work with his renter was they went into their local office. Him and his renter met with the district conservationist and the resource soil scientist, and they talked about not only why soil health is important, but how do you make it work. And NRCS provides a lot of programs, cost share programs that can help offset some of the costs of these practices. So if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact your local NRCS office. The Soil and Water Conservation District, University of Extension are great resources. Most importantly, this is about legacy. What legacy do you want to leave? You want to leave the land better than you found it. You're building this resource for the next generation. This topsoil that we talked about that took so long to form, that's your legacy, and you don't want to see it washing or blowing away. So with time, you'll see these positive changes on your land, the reduction in erosion, improved water infiltration, improved nutrient cycling. And while many soil health farmers see increased productivity and yield, it's really important not to focus on yields alone. Even though we have improved efficiency and resiliency in the whole system, we're looking at what is your cost per acre, not just yield. So if you can minimize your inputs and your diesel usage by implementing soil health practices, that's really where you're going to reap the benefit.
I think those are excellent points. And one of the things, the point that you kind of led off with was not to set the bar too high, because it is super exciting what's happening with soil health right now. You can't pick up a farm magazine or, listen to a farm broadcast anymore without them talking about that. So it's easy to get really excited, see how some of the real innovators are out there having the success, but you need to kind of, like you said, take those baby steps.
Right, and I think the other thing that we talked about today that was really important is if you have a neighboring farmer or someone in your community who's doing soil health and making it work, that is the best education that your renter can get, is to connect with somebody who's making it happen, and they can talk about the challenges, the things that have worked and haven't worked. So really, it's best for farmers to learn from one another. But it is exciting, and it's good to be excited, and it is good to have expectations. But yes, I also think there need to be realistic ones.
Just one other thing, and I think one of the ways to maybe have that positive conversation or do it in a positive light is soil health seems to be one of those things where eventually, once it gets established and that soil is kind of self-reliant, that it can benefit the renter as well as the landowner kind of thing. It's kind of a win-win kind of thing.
Absolutely. So what we've seen over time is when you can build this soil system that not only is cycling nutrients more efficiently, is infiltrating and holding water more efficiently, it's more resilient. So a lot of times today we talked about how less and less are we seeing, a half an inch to an inch of rain over the course of the growing season, how it's becoming a lot more common to see these large bursts of rain, 4, 5, 6 inches at a time. And so this renter then will see that not only is he renting land that's just more efficient, but it's less of a risk for him because it can withstand these intense rain events, these weather events that we're seeing, and hopefully have less of an impact on his bottom line.
For more on the Land Stewardship Project's work to help landowners continue their stewardship legacy, see our Conservation Leases page at landstewardshipproject.org. There you'll find fact sheets, sample lease agreements, presentations, and links to other resources. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-722-6377. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, a Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.